Anna Palmer. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of Punchbowl News. We are thrilled to be hosting this pop-up conversation this morning with Senator Mike Rounds, a Republican from South Dakota. He's going to join us this morning for a conversation of news of the day, as well as a focus on artificial intelligence. Senator Rounds is the co-chair of the AI Caucus, and we are in the middle of our four-part series, The AI Impact. So we have a lot to cover this morning. A big thank you to Google for partnering with us on the AI Impact and this conversation. After I'm done speaking with Senator Rounds, Kent Walker, the president of global affairs at Google, is going to join me for a fireside chat. As always, we encourage you to share this conversation on all social media channels. You can find Punchbowl News at Punchbowl News on those channels. And if you're standing in the back, there's some seats up here. Please feel free to fill in. And with that, I'm going to welcome Senator Rounds to the stage. Senator.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right, well, no shortage of things to discuss this morning. We're going to start, as we always do, with a few news of the day questions. We'll start with the FAA reauthorization bill. The latest bill text was released, and one of the biggest points of contention, DCA, Washington Reagan National Air Slots, as anybody who's from DC knows, we're all wondering if this is going to happen or not. Are you in support of those slots being expanded or not?
You know, when we talked about it a little bit in our conference, and the folks out west would love to have a few more contacts or another couple other locations where they could actually fly into. We'll listen to both sides. Personally, I haven't made up my mind yet, so we'll listen to what they've got to say and then make a decision at that time. Maybe they'll find a compromise, I'm not sure, but most certainly it's an item that has been an item of topic, particularly because, you know, look, the bottom line is most folks, you all know, we leave every week, we go back home again, spend a couple days back in your home state, and then you're back out again. Reagan is a great location to leave from, and to be able to have access to in Reagan rather than Dulles to get back out into the western states, that's something I think that a lot of our members have really wanted to have.
Yeah, makes sense. Speaking of going west, you're from South Dakota. I'm originally from North Dakota. The Farm Bill. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, you protect us from Canada, basically.
I mean, just leave it up to me. I got it. Don't worry. But the Farm Bill is coming up in the House. We're expecting that to have some action in May. Clearly an issue for your home state, a big issue that's been delayed and delayed. What's happening in the Senate?
Nothing right now. Bottom line, but the reason is because number one, you've got a chairman who would really like to do something, but at the same time, the issue is this is called a farm bill, but about 85% of what's in the farm bill really doesn't have a lot to do with farming and ranching. It has more to do with nutrition. And so you've got a lot of folks involved in this that would like to see more of the dollars go into the nutrition side of things as opposed to what we call the farm safety net. And so you've got a ranking member who is saying, look, it's called the Farm Bill. Let's make sure we've got the safety net in place. The discussion between the ranking member and the chairman is going to go on. And I think what's really happening here is who's going to get a better deal before or after the election results, and who's going to get a better deal by working on it in the time period between the election and the end of the year versus waiting until the new administration comes in. So you don't know who's going to control the House, who's going to control the Senate, or who's going to control the administration. Those are the things that are going in right now to factoring in as to whether or not there can be a deal made before or after the election. Personally, I think the best shot would be after the election.
In the lame duck.
Yeah.
I agree. All right, we're going to talk politics real quick and then get into AI. We are in the middle of, as you just alluded to, the 2024 election. You had previously suggested it was time to move on from former President Donald Trump. That has obviously changed. Do you support him, and do you think you'll be campaigning with him?
Probably not even being invited to campaign with him is my suspicion. Look, here's the bottom line. I think the American people, if they had their way, they would not look at either of the two candidates. But right now we've got two candidates in front of us, and it's a matter of, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? And the vast majority of Americans right now are saying, no, we're not. And the reason is because of the inflationary trends that have occurred. President Biden made some decisions on day one. He sent a message to energy producers that he could kill a major project, a pipeline, with the stroke of a pen. That was a multi-billion-dollar project. Investors looked at that and said, holy crap, what are we going to do with this kind of stuff? How are we going to handle this in the future, and what can we invest in? But energy producers found out that this was going to be not the same kind of a game where we were going to be energy independent anymore. And that has sent a chill back in. If you take a look at your energy, a lot of your energy prices are up 40%. Gasoline is up over 40%. Even your rent is up 20%. And since President Biden came in. So his policies are pushing people to say, I want something different. At the same time, President Trump, during the time that he was president, a lot of his policies helped to develop and to push, particularly with tax policy, pushed investment, and we started to see things move. Now, you had a pandemic in the middle of this whole thing, and people fell into this point of, walking into what was a really moving economy, one in which we suddenly found ourselves in a catastrophic time in a lot of people's lives, and now moving back out of it again, we thought things were going to get back to normal, and they're not. Inflation was up, and interest rates are up. Right now, we're going to be dealing with national defense. Right now, we spend about $850 billion a year in national defense. Did you know that next year we're going to spend more on the interest on the federal debt than what we are on defense? And so when we start talking about those kinds of things, they're saying we're not really sure about this. Look, so now people are faced with, we see two candidates. Most of us would like to move on someplace else, but President Trump has a huge backing of folks who have said, look, he delivered results. And when you're talking about delivering results, they're talking about being respected worldwide, and they're talking about the economy. President Biden, people are saying right now, we're not feeling the same way about him. And so you've got a real challenge out there, and the American people are going to have some tough decisions to make. And one of the answers is none of the above. You don't find that on the ballot. So it's going to be hard. For those of us who are Republican, yeah, we're going to support the Republican nominee. Just because policy-wise, long-term, it's the right thing to do for our country, even though we may have some serious disagreements with the approach that the former president has taken. Real serious.
All right, let's get into AI, because that's why we are here to talk. Something you were very keyed into as the co-chair of the AI caucus in the Senate. We've been reporting for the past couple of weeks on different areas that AI in particular has been kind of different areas, whether it's healthcare and science, education, cybersecurity, small business. Talk about where your focus is when it comes to AI being deployed right now and what that could mean for the U.S.
Look, artificial intelligence has been here. We just have looked at it in different manners. For a long time, we called it machine learning. What happened along the way, as some of the experts in it have told me, they said, look, we used to always talk about the ability to actually make decisions very, very quickly as a matter of machine learning, and yet at the same time, we found out that there wasn't as much money in it if we called it machine learning than if we called it artificial intelligence. Investments came when we started talking about it in a different light. So part of it was marketing, but here's the real deal on it. It's real. It actually allows us to make major decision-making in a more rapid manner. And the people that can make the right decisions more quickly, they win the battles, whether you're talking about healthcare, whether you're talking marketing, whether you're talking finance, whether you're talking national defense. All of those require rapid decision-making that is very, very accurate. And so for us, when we talk about artificial intelligence, it's a matter not just of the capability itself, meaning how quickly can a decision made by a computer, but then how do you incorporate that into the different aspects of what really does affect the lives of American people? How do you incorporate that? How do you bring that into the fold? That's the place where we're at right now. And so people are seeing it. Sometimes it's behind the scenes. As an example, right now, if you take a look at what's going on the internet with regard to how they follow what see what you're interested in, and then make sure that you get the ads that you see on a regular basis and so forth. That's being done because they can look at the areas that you seem to express an interest in, have expressed an interest in, and then how do they get the opportunity to market their products in front of you. National defense-wise, very, very similar in terms of we know that our adversaries are doing their best to be able to move offensive capabilities as quickly as possible. The way that we want to handle ours is we want our ability to defend against those decisions to be made as quickly as possible. And by the way, it's not just the superpowers. Small countries can buy that capability today. The war between Armenia and Azerbaijan back in 2020, it's called the Nagorno-Karabakh War. This was an area in which Azerbaijan literally destroyed 1,000 pieces of equipment in a matter of less than 40 days, using, in many ways, artificial intelligence with drones. They went in, they took out weapon systems that were there to defend this area that Armenia had. In a very short period of time, were able to identify targets and then use the right types of munitions on those targets. And they did it with stuff they could buy, and they bought it from other countries. So it's for real, it's not going away, and we have to incorporate it as quickly and as efficiently as possible into our national defense systems as well.
I want to talk about healthcare. That's an area where we focused on in this series in terms of the opportunities that a lot of people see in the industry, but then also concerns that some of your colleagues have raised when it comes to privacy, when it comes to how it's actually going to be deployed. What types of conversations are you having with your colleagues when it comes to healthcare and AI?
What I tell folks is if there was one thing that's going to bring the American public in full support for the implementation of artificial intelligence, it's going to be healthcare. I'm personally convinced, based on what we've been able to learn, and part of it was because within the Department of Defense, we had a group of individuals get together and they made recommendations to the department based on where we should go for national security on AI. Part of it was on pandemic protection, and it was extremely classified. I was frustrated because included in that, when you start talking about pandemic protection, is also the ability to talk about other healthcare issues. Part of that is for me, a very personal item, which is cancer. I lost my wife to cancer about 2.5 years ago. But I saw the development for capabilities during a very short period of time, how quickly we can adapt and find paths forward. If you take artificial intelligence, you make decisions about something that works or does not work based upon minute items within the series of proteins that I suspect your next speaker will talk about, at least I hope he does. And what we want to be able to do is to make decisions about the right way to save lives more quickly. Let me just tease this a little bit. I believe that if we properly incorporate AI into our healthcare and into the laboratories, we can cure the vast majority of cancers within a 5-year period of time. Now think about what that does for quality of life. Don't just stop there, because think about what happens with Parkinson's. Think about, and now take the practical side of this, not just the quality of life side, but think for a second about what it does to the federal budget when we don't have the healthcare costs going on for literally decades at a time for taking care of people that are going to be in nursing homes because we haven't been able to fix Parkinson's or other types of long-term healthcare problems. AI has the key to this if we incorporate it properly into those healthcare areas that simply have to have decisions made more quickly than what they can be today. I'm a believer in it, and I think the quality of life goes way, way up when we make sure that we are able to implement it and to incorporate it into the research that otherwise would be done at a slower pace than what it can be done with AI.
I want to talk about workforce in general, kind of zoom out a little bit. And one of the biggest topics that we hear kind of as reporters around the country as well as in Congress is what is this impact going to mean for different kind of sectors? But I know that you've been thinking a lot about how AI can optimize workflows in different industries, and maybe not just kind of the typical ones that we might think of, but in, at ports and other areas as well.
Yeah, look, right now it literally takes longer for us to rehab a submarine than what it did to build it in the first place. We believe that if we can incorporate supply chains and the process of making sure all the materials are there at the right location for the Navy, as an example, we should be able to get a submarine in quickly into a dry dock, get it rehabbed and back out again faster than what we can today. These are assets that the taxpayer has paid for. The USS Boise, which is a Los Angeles class attack submarine, been sitting outside, not being utilized since at least 2017. It's just now getting to the point where we've got the supplies, materials together to where we can start working on it. That's not a good use of taxpayer funds. But if we can use AI to put together all of the necessary items in advance to where once you're pulling, whether it's an aircraft carrier into a dry dock, whether it's a destroyer into a dry dock or whatever for its midlife rehab, if you can do that more quickly and have all of the stuff ready based upon what AI has told you you're going to have to replace and repair. Now you can do it more quickly. So in that respect, I really think the opportunity for the supply chains to be dramatically improved goes way, way up using AI. A lot of people say, well, what about the labor force? Look, I think using AI, we can actually make that labor force more effective and actually be able to utilize a labor force in such a fashion that they become more valuable for us. We don't have an increasing labor force. We need to not only use AI to make the labor force that we have more capable, but we've also got to recognize the fact that if America wants to remain a superpower, we've got to continue to develop that labor force as well. So the decision makers, this is not a case of trying to take people out of the labor force. This is a case of trying to make sure that the labor force we've got can be as effective as possible.
I want to talk about that because one of the interesting conversations that Mika Sollner, one of our reporters, had as part of the AI impact was looking at how the SBA administration is trying to think about AI, particularly not just in Silicon Valley and other tech hubs, but in places like South Dakota.
Yeah.
What are you seeing in that area? What are you hearing from your constituents when it comes to that?
You can do, I think you got to go back to two basics for me. Number one is you're going to have two types of databases. You're going to have the open source databases and you're going to have proprietary databases. You need both. But then you also need to have computer systems, capabilities, the ability to compute with very quiet supercomputers that a lot of people don't have access to, probably in our national labs and so forth. But then you need another set of very, very capable systems that universities across this country can have access to, regardless of where you're at. Because I don't think we can make decisions or learn as much information with proprietary systems than we can with open systems, open databases, right, and allow a huge number of people to be able to have access to it. You need both. So for places like South Dakota, North Dakota, and other areas, we need to have access for young people, individuals doing research and so forth, to have access to computational capabilities. We've tried to actually put that together. I think we're going to be successful in doing so that everybody across the country can look at open source databases, but also recognize that there is a need for proprietary databases as well. And then I'm just going to talk about it. Look, if you're talking about stuff that could be used in a pandemic, if you're talking about stuff with regard to nuclear capabilities and so forth, those are going to be proprietary in nature. And you're not going to get all that data in an open source. Right. But if you're talking about research and an opportunity to work on cancers and to work on healthcare and so forth, those databases have got to be open source.
So we saw a lot of interest from lawmakers earlier this year with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer working with Senator Todd Young when it comes to setting up working groups and trying to bring in the private sector. Congress isn't necessarily known for being tech forward. Right. Where do those conversations stand? It's been really kind of at that committee level, but are things moving? It feels like we're kind of like 2 steps forward maybe, and then it's been a pause. Yeah,
Martin Heinrich, Senator Young, Todd Young, Senator Schumer and myself were part of a 4-team group that we came together just to say, look, let's try to put together as much information as we possibly can on AI so that more and more of our members and their staffs could get as much information as we could from some of the brightest minds in the AI world. And so we did, I think, 11 different meetings with folks from around the country coming in a closed setting in a way, so that good information could be provided from them directly based upon questions from members of the Senate. But we wanted all sides of a particular issue, whether we were talking about innovation or we're talking about election security and so forth, or national defense for that matter. And so we tried to get as much information so that members of the Senate and their staffs could get kind of an inkling of where AI fit into all these different areas. We didn't want to try to do a comprehensive approach to AI. What we wanted to say is we're going to get the different committees and their areas of expertise to recognize how AI could impact what they're doing. We think we've been successful, and what we wanted is lots of different ideas coming across lots of different committees based upon the areas that they wanted. If you're talking about patents or copyrights, whether you're talking about intellectual properties and so forth, different committees are going to have an interest. National Security, Armed Services Committee, Commerce is going to have an interest. But we just simply wanted to give them enough confidence to know that they could actually look at this and then come back in, committee by committee, and look at the areas where there were ideas being brought to them. Not to try to do comprehensive stuff, but rather to incorporate the need to recognize AI's impact on the areas where they were already creating laws.
A lot of lawmakers have put together different proposals and bills. How likely do you think anything passes? I mean, we're kind of going into the election season before the election, or do you think this is really even a next Congress?
It could be next Congress, but I think you're going to see proposed legislation this Congress. Now, something getting past Congress, I mean, look, it's got to be House and Senate, but you got to start someplace. The House is working on it now as well. The fact that we're talking about it, bringing it in, is a step in the right direction. We don't want to do damage. We don't want to have a regulatory impact that slows down our development and allows development near our adversaries to move more quickly. But at the same time, we want to provide incentives so that development of AI occurs in our country rather than in other places around the world.
One last quick question. Public-private sector, how important is it in working together in this area?
We cannot do this without an arm's length partnership, but a true partnership between private sector and the government. There is no other place in the world where private sector is going to be able to do what they can do in the United States, and you most certainly don't want to have what the private sector can do being done in a place like China or Russia. They recognize that. So we want them to feel comfortable here in the United States, but we also have to understand that AI, if it is weaponized in the wrong direction, can be very, very dangerous for individuals, and you can impact the availability for good information for the general public. It's a balancing act. We want to provide guidelines, but we also want to provide incentives. That's going to be the challenge that we face.
All right, Senator Rounds, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it this morning.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. No, absolutely. You bet.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right, now I'm going to welcome Kent Walker to the stage for our fireside chat. It is a little squishy there. Welcome. All right, Kent, you are President of Global Affairs at Google. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
It's a real pleasure, Anna, and I want to thank Senator Rounds, who just stepped out, for his leadership in bringing everyone together on these issues.
He's really focused on the issues. Even just talking backstage was pretty interesting to hear kind of all the activity behind the scenes that is happening. You have a big portfolio at Google. You oversee the teams responsible for legal matters, government affairs, content policy, and philanthropy. But in this conversation, I thought it was really interesting to note you've also served as the first chair of Global Internet Forum to combat terrorism, and you oversaw Google's AI principles in 2018, becoming chair of the company's Advanced Technology Review Council. So I can't think of a better person to be having this conversation with.
It's a fascinating time for all of us.
So we heard Senator Rounds talk a lot about how Washington is approaching AI. We are finishing this 4-part series talking about the AI impact. I want to talk about some of the biggest opportunities as you see them from your vantage point for AI. When we look at sectors, let's start with health and science, for instance.
Sure. There's been a lot of focus on AI as a chatbot, essentially. But we forget, you all have been using AI for a dozen years. If you've used Search or Maps or Translate or haven't gotten spam in Gmail, that's all been AI, just making tools working better. And now we're at this moment where AI is suddenly taking center stage. We're seeing remarkable advances that are really leading to science at digital speed. So healthcare is a fantastic example. The senator talked a little bit about this. Let me tell just one story about what we're seeing out there. So 20 years ago, humanity sequenced the human DNA, which is a great achievement, but didn't actually lead to as many medical breakthroughs as you might have thought. Because understanding the DNA is just the first step. You have to understand how each protein folds itself, how it expresses itself. If a COVID virus has spikes like this, you need one vaccine. If it spikes like this, you need a different vaccine. Well, there are 250 million different proteins known to science. Until just a few years ago, it took a biology PhD student an entire thesis, 3 or 4 years, to fold just one protein. Our team at DeepMind was able to do enough pattern analysis that they could fold all 250 million of them in a month, and then released it to the world. So that's like taking every man, woman, and child in the United States of America, training them to be a biology PhD researcher, and then having them do nothing but fold proteins for 3 or 4 years. So what's the consequence of that? We now have almost 2 million researchers around the world using these tools to diagnose disease, to understand new medical advances that they can make. We're seeing progress in not just cancer, but Alzheimer's, malaria, tuberculosis, understanding patterns now that are from chest x-rays. So you're seeing really a revolution in medical science. Something that might have taken a generation is now taking a year. And that's just one example.
It's pretty incredible when you think about that. And you lay it out in such a concrete example. Another area where we heard the senators speak a lot about cybersecurity. Our own Andrew Desiderio, our senior congressional reporter, went deep on that issue and how there's been a lot of bipartisanship trying to find a way forward, especially when it comes to elections and bad actors in Russia and China. In your mind, what is the most pressing challenge for Congress right now in the cyber realm?
Well, I think we need to actually get to work and start to deploy some of the advances that are actually out there. Now, on the one hand, AI can be a threat because it accelerates, it amplifies the efforts of bad actors, whether that's cyber attack or disinformation. But increasingly, AI can be our best friend in identifying the kinds of patterns of disruption that adversaries are trying to pull off. That means being able to surveil our networks, identify individual vulnerabilities much more quickly than we could have before. We've talked about the Secure AI Framework, SAFE for short, and how we can actually strengthen all of our networks. Multi-factor authentication that's easy to use, making more robust protections that are sort of constantly being monitored. That could really ramp up our game. As the world becomes more digital, this is more and more important. And having the US government be a leader in the adoption of high standards where we don't buy security tools anymore, we buy secure tools. We build from the bottom up with security in mind. That will make all of us more safe and secure.
I want to talk about workforce. It's such a big issue and on the minds of so many people as employees, as employers. What's the future? Google is obviously a very large employer. Can you talk about workforce in general when it comes to AI, and what does that transition look like, especially when we think about kind of the increase of productivity?
Yeah, it's a really important topic because on the one hand, we are looking at massive changes and improvements in productivity. American workers will simply become more productive and we think more creative, freed from doing administrative, operational kinds of jobs that are repetitive and freed up to do sort of second-order jobs. How do we bring that about? Well, the first element is to make sure people are comfortable with these new tools. AI is remarkable in a number of respects. It's about the only tool I know of that teaches you how to use the tool. A hammer doesn't teach you how to hit a nail. But AI will actually tell you, how do I ask better prompts about this? How do I use AI if I want to do financial analysis or understand agricultural productivity? And so it upskills the least skilled among us, which is pretty powerful and unusual. So we just, this last week, announced the AI Opportunity Fund, putting $75 million to work in partnership with a number of schools and institutions around the country to give a basic level of IT skills to every American who wants it. We also launched the AI Essentials program, which in roughly 10 hours or so will teach you everything you need to know about using AI to be more productive in whatever line of work you're in. So as we think about this, the future of work, it's going to be really important for all of us to have a baseline understanding and then figure out how do we put these tools to work for us.
So we're obviously in Washington, but before we talk about kind of the conversation here, you have a global perspective. Let's set the stage about the role the U.S. is playing around the globe. You said, I was watching yesterday in a recent panel conversation, that we're in a quote-unquote innovation race. What did you mean when you said that?
Well, it's a challenge for all of us right now around the world to understand this incredible technology, which can be used for huge amounts of good, but also can be abused and can be used by our adversaries. And as Senator Rounds was saying earlier on, we know right now that there are lots of countries that are racing to develop this technology. The United States right now has roughly 50% of the large language models that are out there, but China has roughly 40%. And other countries around the world are also investing an awful lot in these technologies. So AI in many ways is a triumph of American ingenuity and a triumph of our ability to innovate and find the next set of solutions. But we risk wasting that opportunity if we're not doubling down on the deployment. making sure that we're actually putting it to use in everyday life. Because we know around the world, other countries are moving forward aggressively. The United States needs to keep pace.
You also did a poll recently with Ipsos, kind of surveying the globe about AI. It was interesting in so much, from my perspective, that the developing countries were much more optimistic than what we see here in the U.S. What do you read into that, and is there a need to change that narrative that more Americans maybe should be positive about the future of AI?
It was a surprising poll. I've never seen this before in my years in technology, that the most optimistic people in the world were in the developing economies, who are looking at what AI may be able to do to turbocharge their development. The next most optimistic sector was the Asia Pacific region, which has traditionally been optimistic about technology as an on-ramp into the global economy. The next most optimistic region was Europe. And the United States was the least optimistic place in the world about this technology. I have never seen that. I've never seen, why were Americans less optimistic than Europeans? And I do think we have to move beyond some of the gloom and doom narrative, and while recognizing the importance of that set of issues, also be looking at the opportunity agenda. How do we make sure this is something that benefits everybody throughout society, small businesses, underrepresented communities, everyday workers? The opportunity here is remarkable, and I think we need to do a better job of telling that story.
So we are in Washington. You've been in the tech industry a long time. You've seen some of these fights play out or discussions on regulation. Senator Rounds and I discussed that there's been a lot of interest when it comes to lawmakers on both sides of the aisle to understand AI, kind of try to figure out what the way it should either be regulated or not. How do you see this going right now?
I actually think Washington is doing quite well in coming to terms with this really significant new technological development. You see the Insight forums on the Senate side that the Senator spoke about. There's also a blue ribbon bipartisan commission on the House side, led by some of the House members who are most knowledgeable about AI, that are taking their time to really understand the new technology most deeply. And that's probably the best thing you can do with a general purpose technology, whether you're thinking about the internet or the steam engine or artificial intelligence. What are the implications? How is it going to affect the different communities out there? How should the law adapt or not? And we think that's leading to a thoughtful and incremental approach to not rushing out and having a new department of AI any more than we have a department of engines or one law that deals with everything you can do with electricity. But instead, identify where there are gaps, fill those gaps thoughtfully, work together in public and private sectors to take advantage of private sector R&D, but also the government's ability to actually scale things and get to a better outcome. So I think we're on a good trajectory, both in the United States, and the United States has been leading a lot of conversations around the world, the OECD, the United Nations, the G7, and more. So there's a lot of energy and excitement trying to concentrate that and think about how we implement thoughtfully is really the key work ahead of us over the next couple of years.
Two quick questions before we get the hook here. One, I asked Senator Rounds about kind of that public-private partnership. He said it was important to have an arm's length, but a real working relationship. What is your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely right. Look at the amount of R&D that the United States has done. In the early 1960s, 2.5% of GDP was being done, R&D was at the federal level, was funded by the public. Today, that level is roughly 0.5%. The private sector has picked up the slack. But that now means that we have to take advantage of the learnings we're getting from the private sector R&D and put it to work for public purposes, whether those are the Sustainable Development Goals or national productivity. So it couldn't be more important that we work together here.
All right, last question. I'm going to end where we often end in these fireside chats. There are a lot of staffers, advocates, people from other companies in person as well as watching on the live stream. What's the one takeaway you hope they have from our conversation?
We talked earlier about technology races. Technology races often are won not by the first country to invent a technology, but by the best country to deploy a technology. Thinking about how we can actually implement the advances we're seeing, and we're seeing more and more every day. Even in the course of the last year, these tools have gotten more powerful. They're moving from language prediction to pattern recognition to being able to absorb more and more context. How do we think about in our daily lives and in the great advances of science and technology? How do we make this a win for all of us? That's a huge joint shared project, but we're optimistic that we can pull it off.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Ken, thank you so much for your time this morning. A big thank you to Senator Rounds and his team for joining us this morning, and to Google for partnering with us on the AI Impact. We have our last installment coming out next week on education and the workforce, so you can check that out at punchbowl.news. We have many more conversations throughout the month of May, so you can check out our events hub at punchbowl.news. Have a great day and stay safe, everybody. Thank you very much.